The Kiel Mutiny was a major revolt by sailors of the German High Seas Fleet on 3 November 1918. The revolt triggered the German Revolution, which was to sweep aside the monarchy within a few days. It ultimately led to the end of the German Empire and to the establishment of the Weimar Republic. Background: by September 1918, Germany's military situation was close to hopeless. Kaiser Wilhelm II was advised to request the Entente Cordiale for an immediate ceasefire and put the government on a democratic footing, hoping for more favorable peace terms. On 3 October, the Kaiser appointed Prince Maximilian of Baden as the new imperial chancellor. In his cabinet, the Social Democrats also took on responsibility. The most prominent and highest ranking was Philipp Scheidemann, a prominent leader of the SPD, as undersecretary without portfolio, Amiral in the High Seas Fleet. Following the Battle of Jutland, the capital ships of the Imperial Navy had been confined to inactive service in harbour. Many officers and crewmen had volunteered to transfer to the submarines and light vessels which still had a major part to play in the war. The discipline and spirit of those who remained on lower rations with the battleships tied up at dockside inevitably suffered. On 2 August 1917, 350 crewmen of the dreadnought Prinz Regent Luitpold staged a protest demonstration in Wilhelmshaven. 2 of the ringleaders were executed by firing squad while others were sentenced to prison. During the remaining months of the war, secret sailors' councils were formed on a number of the capital ships. Naval Order of 24 October 1918. While the war-weary troops and the population, disappointed by the Kaiser's government, awaited a speedy end to the war, the Imperial Naval Command in Kiel under Admiral Franz von Hippert, without authorization, planned to dispatch the fleet for a final battle against the Royal Navy in the English Channel. The Naval Order of 24 October 1918 and the preparations to sail first triggered a mutiny among the affected sailors and then a general revolution, which was to sweep aside the monarchy within a few days. The mutinous sailors had no intention of being sacrificed in the last moments of the war. They were also convinced that the credibility of the new democratic government which was seeking peace would be compromised by a simultaneous naval attack. Wilhelmshaven Mutiny. The sailors' revolt started on the Schillig roads off Wilhelmshaven, where the German fleet had anchored in expectation of a planned battle. During the night from 29 to 30 October 1918, some crews refused to obey orders. Sailors on board 3 ships from the 3rd Navy Squadron refused to weigh anchor. Part of the crew on SMS Thüringen and SMS Helgoland, 2 battleships from the 1st Navy Squadron, committed outright mutiny and sabotage. However, when a day later, some torpedo boats pointed the cannons at these ships, the mutineers gave up and were led away without any resistance. Nevertheless, the Naval Command had to drop its plans as it was felt that the crew's loyalty could no longer be relied upon. The 3rd Navy Squadron was ordered back to Kiel. Sailors' revolt in Kiel. The squadron commander, Vice-Admiral Hugo Kraft, exercised a maneuver with his battleships in the Heligoland Bight. When it functioned perfectly, he believed he was master of his crews again. While moving through the Kiel Canal, he had 47 sailors from the Markgraf, who were seen as the ringleaders, imprisoned. In Holtenau they were brought to the Arrestanstalt and to Fort Herwarth in the north of Kiel. The sailors and stokers were now pulling out all the stops to prevent the fleet from setting sail again and to achieve the release of their comrades. Some 250 met in the evening of 1 November in the Union House in Kiel. Delegations sent to their officers requesting the mutineers' release were not heard. The sailors were now looking for closer ties to the unions, the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany and the SPD. Thereupon the Union House was closed by police, leading to an even larger joint open-air meeting on the 2nd of November, at the large drill ground, led by the sailor Karl Artelt, who worked in the repair shipyard for torpedo boats in Kiel, and by the mobilized shipyard worker Lothar Popp, both USPD members. The sailors called for a large meeting the following day at the same place. This call was heeded by several thousand people on the afternoon of the 3rd of November, with workers' representatives also being present. The slogan, "Frieden und Brot," was raised, showing that the sailors and workers demanded not only the release of the imprisoned but also the end of the war and the improvement of food provisions. Eventually the people supported Artelt's call to free the prisoners, and they moved in the direction of the military prison. Sub-Lieutenant Steinhauser, who had orders to stop the demonstrators, ordered his patrol to give warning shots and then to shoot directly into the demonstrators. 7 men were killed and 29 were seriously injured. Some demonstrators also opened fire. Steinhauser was severely injured by rifle butt blows and shots, but contrary to later statements, he was not killed. After this incident, commonly viewed as the starting point of the German Revolution, the demonstrators dispersed and the patrol withdrew. Protesters take over Kiel. Wilhelmshaven, the governor of the naval station, initially asked for outside troops but revoked his request for military assistance when his staff claimed the situation was under control. Souchon had been deployed to Kiel only a few days earlier on the 30th of October 1918 and therefore had to rely heavily on his staff. On the 4th of November, however, the request was renewed, resulting in 6 infantry companies being brought to Kiel. Some units stayed in the city quarter Wicken in the mariner station der Ostsee. However, these troops also showed signs of disintegration and some joined the revolutionaries or went back. On the morning of the 4th of November, groups of mutineers moved through the town. Sailors in a large barracks compound in a northern district of Kiel refused obedience. After a division inspection of the commander, spontaneous demonstrations took place. Karl Artelt organized the first Soldiers' Council, and soon many more were set up. The governor of the navy station had to negotiate and to order the withdrawal of the units. The imprisoned sailors and stokers were freed. Soldiers and workers brought public and military institutions under the control. When, against Souchon's promise, different troops advanced to quash the rebellion, they were intercepted by the mutineers and were either sent back or joined the sailors and workers. By the evening of the 4th of November, Kiel was firmly in the hands of approximately 40,000 rebellious sailors, soldiers and workers, as was Wilhelmshaven 2 days later. Late in the evening of the 4th of November, a meeting of sailors and workers representatives in the Union House led to the establishment of a Soldiers' and a Workers' Council. The Kiel 14 points of the Soldiers' Council were issued. Resolutions and demands of the Soldiers' Council: the release of all inmates and political prisoners, complete freedom of speech and the press, the abolition of male censorship, appropriate treatment of crews by superiors, no punishment for all comrades on returning to the ships and to the barracks, the launching of the fleet is to be prevented under all circumstances, any defensive measures involving bloodshed are to be prevented, the withdrawal of all troops not belonging to the garrison, all measures for the protection of private property will be determined by the Soldiers' Council immediately. Superiors will no longer be recognized outside of duty. Unlimited personal freedom of every man from the end of his tour of duty until the beginning of his next tour of duty. Officers who declare themselves in agreement with the measures of the newly established Soldiers' Council are welcomed in our midst. All the others have to quit their duty without entitlement to provision. Every member of the Soldiers' Council is to be released from any duty. All measures to be introduced in the future can only be introduced with the consent of the Soldiers' Council. These demands are orders of the Soldiers' Council and are binding for every military person. Dirk Danhart came to the following conclusion in his 1978 doctoral thesis: the 14 points of Kiel were mainly an attack on the military system. Political objectives were lacking widely. Danhart attributes this on the one hand to the heterogeneous composition of the bodies, and on the other hand to the intention to first of all issue a catalogue of immediate measures. During the following events, councils all over Germany oriented themselves on these 14 items. Danhart saw this political short-sightedness as a major reason for the dissolution of soldiers' councils after 6 months. Wolfram Wett from the German Armed Forces Military History Research Office noted, quote, "The Kiel signal did not point in the direction of a council state according to the Bolshevistic example. Instead it stood for the demand for the fastest possible ending of the war. Secondly, it pointed, starting with the Kiel 14 points, in the direction of a liberal, social and democratic political system, in which especially militarism should have no space anymore." On the same evening, the SPD deputy Gustav Noske arrived in Kiel and was welcomed enthusiastically. Although he had orders from the new government and the SPD leadership to bring the rising under control, he had himself elected chairman of the Soldiers' Council and reinstated peace and order. Some days later he took over the governor's post, while Lothar Popp from the USPD became chairman of the overall Soldiers' Council. During the coming weeks, Noske actually managed to reduce the influence of the councils in Kiel, but he could not prevent the spreading of the revolution to all of Germany. The events had already spread far beyond the city limits. Regarding Noske's role in Kiel, Wett noted, what he however did not bring about, and possibly because of his political basic position was not able and did not want to bring about, was the exemplary test of a future-oriented republic reform program. Such an experiment would have been quite possible in Kiel, at any rate, in the military-political area. Attempts regarding persons and structures were there. Noske didn't foster and didn't utilize them, but suffocated them before they could develop. Quote, "Aftermath. German Revolution of 1918-19. Other seamen, soldiers and workers, in solidarity with the arrested, began electing workers and soldiers' councils modeled after the Soviets of the Russian Revolution of 1917, and took over military and civil powers in many cities. On the 7th of November, the revolution had reached Munich, causing Ludwig III of Bavaria to flee.